I'm Charles Feldman, and welcome to another episode of SOS America. And this is a podcast, as we've said before, that aims to accomplish maybe two things. One, for those of you who are watching or listening here in the States, is to try to explain what exactly is going on now here in the States. But more importantly, this podcast is really aimed at people who are not in the United States and who are trying to figure out what the hell is going on here and whether or not it is going to impact them, whether they want to do tourism, whether they want to do business investments, or whether or not they're just trying to figure out what is happening in the country that really is, as I've said before, the 800,000-pound gorilla sitting on the face of the earth. And so we've had a number of discussions already with some very interesting people about different aspects of what is going on here. And so today, I am very pleased to be joined by somebody who I've known for quite some time, Ron Kuby, who is an attorney, and he's got a very interesting background, more interesting, I dare say, than most lawyers. And while normally I would give a brief synopsis of a person's career, that probably defies my abilities. So I'm going to actually let Ron give a quick synopsis of his own career, because I think most people will agree it is very interesting and very laudable, I might add. So Ron Kuby, welcome to SOS America.
Well, thank you very much, Charles. It's great to see you again. I rigorously stay away from writing my own biographies. People can Google it if they want. I will say I was born at a very young age. And
it's going to be one of those interviews.
Right. And
you were born at a young age. Yeah.
Quit school and worked on a tugboat and went to college and went to law school. I started my professional life as a lawyer began in 1982 when I interned for the famous William Kunstler, one of the greatest civil rights and criminal defense lawyers of the last half of the 20th century. Who was known for representing the dissidents and despised and demented and all of those on the margins of society. And I continued to do the same thing, even unto this day. I now have 41 years, which sounds incredible to me.
Yeah.
40 years as a practicing lawyer in the criminal defense, civil rights area, frequently around First Amendment issues that tend to intersect with the criminal legal system and other issues.
Mm-hmm.
And have been watching and opposing the government for decades. I mean, I end up on the opposite side of the courtroom. And I've seen administrations come and I've seen them go. And I'd like to take the time that we have today to really talk about what is actually happening on the ground to people who are being policied, or shall we say, policed.
Okay, very good. See, you gave a very good bio. I couldn't have done any better myself. So thank you for that. Because it is an interesting background, and I think people who are watching this should know. Somebody walked in the back.
I also know that was my wife that walked.
That is your wife. So hello. But anyway, I think people should get a sense of who you are and where you're coming from on some of these issues. Let me start off, because I've asked this question to a few of the previous guests on this podcast, and I've gotten some interesting answers. So I'm going to start with the same question, and then we'll dig down deeper into it. And so my question is, in the past 5 or 6 months, has the United States fundamentally, and that's the word that I want to emphasize, fundamentally changed, and you know where I'm going, what I'm getting into that. Yes, administrations come and go. Every administration in Washington changes things to some degree. There are a few administrations in American history that have had very significant changes. I think you could make the argument, certainly, that Roosevelt was one of them with his New Deal. Johnson, I suppose, was one with his Great Society. Are we in that inflection point now in American history when there has been a fundamental change in the way this country operates?
The thing about inflection points, one doesn't recognize them until they're well past, and that's really sort of a question for historians, which I'm not going to weigh in on here. When it comes, though, to the federal criminal legal system, none of this is new in terms of what's happening. That is to say, administrations have used criminal prosecutions to carry out naked political agendas. We saw that in the Nixon administration. John Mitchell, prosecutor of the Chicago Seven, was consciously trying to dismantle the anti-war movement. We've seen the FBI more out of control than in control. It was the J. Edgar Hoover who engaged in his own personal vendettas against political enemies, who it was the Kennedys who allowed him to illegally wiretap Dr. King. So we see this consistently over the many decades. I think what's different now, and you can decide whether this is fundamental or not. What's different is the sheer volume and scope of it is, I would say unprecedented, with the possible exception of the criminal prosecutions and the deportations in during the first Red Scare during World War I and thereafter. But certainly we've never seen anything like this for a century. And, part of the difficulty is it's not as though good ship justice was sailing along nicely on its appointed course in smooth waters, and then, evil pirate Captain Trump, started preying on innocent merchant ships. He wouldn't have been able to do this had the system not been as fractured as it is. So it's really up to people to decide whether this is a fundamental change. And I'm sure the Trump supporters say, no, it's not. And they engage in an endless, what about Biden? Hey, he pardoned his own son less than a year ago, and you're complaining about the January 6th pardons. What about this person? Endless whataboutism. But what you can't about is the sheer volume and scope of this. And
But it's interesting, Ron, though, when you talk about Trump supporters, many of whom I've talked to over the past few months, they actually do think it's a fundamental change, and in their view, they almost go as far, some of them actually do go as far as thinking it as a revolutionary change. They think he's doing more than just, fine tuning stuff. They think that he's setting the country back on a course that, in their view, was actually interrupted by, I mentioned Roosevelt before, by the New Deal. They think that he's turning back what they view as a period of history, the past, half century roughly, that has not done them good.
Well, what I don't want to do is engage in sort of extensive political commentary and theorizing about the country as a whole. I know the criminal legal system extremely well. And I know civil rights issues in America extremely well. The rest of it, I might as well be, Bill Maher or Joe Rogan, some entertainer spouting off about things that I really don't know anything about outside of what I read and what I hear. I repackage it for an audience and spew it out. I think that Trump supporters are mostly satisfied and happy with what he's done to the criminal legal system and other kinds of attacks by the Justice Department and by the levers of political power. Some of that, I have to confess, even at my advanced age and almost, with senescence looming, I was a little surprised about some of it, because the right wing and conservatives generally have been talking really for 15 or 20 years about freedom of speech and how speech codes on campus are stifling viewpoints, and how what people are calling microaggressions is just leading to universities and the society as a whole policing speech, so there's nothing you can say anymore, blah 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 blah. you know and I actually shared some of those concerns as a civil libertarian. I didn't always agree with the targets, but I shared some of those concerns. And I thought they were sincere on the part of some people, but now we see they absolutely aren't. We see the Justice Department and other organs of government targeting universities for perceived anti-Semitism, and in case of Columbia, taking whole departments in essence and putting them into receivership, although they didn't call it that, fining them millions and hundreds of millions of dollars. Well, I'm fining is wrong. Settling.
Yes, that's right.
Settling the government's claims for hundreds of millions of dollars, and basically creating an atmosphere on campus where you're not just targeting those people who consider Palestinians to be human beings, you're targeting everybody without as much as a peep from those who talked about freedom of speech. In the immigration context, and it's even worse, where you have green card holders who, as your audience may know, are lawful permanent residents in the United States. It is attractive citizenship, and they're accorded almost the full due process rights of citizens. You see green card holders specifically being stripped of their green cards for First Amendment protected statements that they made. One woman, a Turkish woman, actually wrote an op-ed piece criticizing Israel, and she was arrested, put in detention. All of those people have now been released. But you see that kind of targeting even for people who are just coming into the country for tourism reasons. They have to show their social media. The government has said they look to criticism of the American government in social media as one of the criteria that they use to grant or deny visas. So we have people purging their social media. We have students on college campuses living in fear and intimidation, all for the content of their speech. And we have the so-called "we believe in freedom of speech" folks being just fine with it. So I was a little surprised that few, if any, of them have spoken out, and they still don't. Trump has, intimidated them all sufficiently that they don't.
But it's interesting because you were saying before that you would leave it to historians in the future to decide whether or not we are at an inflection point, whether or not these changes are, my word, fundamental. It sounds fundamental to me, Ron. I mean, some of the things that you've just ticked off, and I agree with you, by the way. I mean, you've been a lawyer for a long time. I've covered legal issues for a long time. And yes, I mean, the system in this country, in the US, has many imperfections, as we both know, and many injustices, as we both know. But some of the things that you've just ticked off are things that I don't, in my lifetime, remember as being the norm, whatever the norm is. And I think you wouldn't disagree with that. That to me sounds pretty fundamental as a shift.
I mean, again, if you're going to cabin it to your lifetime, um, I think that that may be accurate. It's hard to know because, during the Eisenhower administration, we had, mass roundups of Mexican workers, um, and mass deportations without any due process.
You had
Uh,
McCarthyism too, of course.
we had McCarthyism. We had William Worthy, the journalist. They took away his passport because he went to Cuba without American permission, and then they tried to ban him from returning to the United States. We had all kinds of attacks during the McCarthy era on liberal institutions, the use of loyalty oaths, Congress and the criminal legal system to go after people who were communists or alleged communists or liberals or trade union leaders. And that all happened within your lifetime, although you were probably just a child when it was going on, but it was within your lifetime. You go back
Yeah.
to the 1920s and the Palmer raids and the mass deportation of Russian immigrants, Jewish immigrants, Italian immigrants because of their politics. So it's not fundamental. I mean, unfortunately, both the left and the right in this country tend to view different portions of American history as kind of golden eras
Mm.
of justice and prosperity. And none of those things are actually accurate. I am also, a historian by academic training. I just throw that in. So, uh, whether this constitutes the end of the Republic and the Democratic experiment, I don't know. You could have, if you were in the midst of the McCarthy era, certainly you would have thought that was the case. If you were, watching Eugene Victor Debs, the person who opposed America's entry into World War I, be shunted off to jail for encouraging draft dodging, and the persecutions of labor leaders and others that followed, you might think it was the end of the Republic. So but I don't think it, to me, I don't think it's useful to talk about what this portends. And it's really, for me anyway, and that's because I'm a practicing lawyer, not so much a political theorist. For me, it's much more important to figure out what is actually happening and what, if anything, can we do to stop it, assuming that we want to.
But you raise an interesting question, I think, Ron, and that is, if all of these things, and they have, of course, historically happened throughout U.S. history, uh, both during my lifetime and before, uh, then it sounds as if really maybe nothing has really changed. I mean, little things change here and there, and in one decade it's one issue, in another decade it's another. So then why hasn't it all changed? Why has the United States continued to, from decade to decade, no matter who's president, Republican, Democrat, left, right, have these same issues in different forms, but still issues that do raise the question about what kind of society we actually are.
So I think that the tensions that exist in American society um, have always been there around different issues. You may remember that bad bit of business back in the 60s, 1860s,
Mm.
over slavery, for example.
Yes.
Uh, these issues have arisen periodically, and we as a society have never resolved them. I think the danger is thinking in terms of Dr. King's, arc of justice, where we see things as beginning at a bad place, slavery, and gradually moving in an arc toward greater and greater freedom for more and more people. And that's just not American history. I mean, American history is filled with uh, constant struggles over individual rights versus governmental power, constant attempts by the government to vilify particular minority groups for the benefit of the people in power, and on and on and on. And so against that sort of scale, what we see the Trump Justice Department doing now is not different, but there is a lot more of it than we've ever seen before. It's a lot more open than it's ever been before. I mean, in the old days, they used to pretend they weren't going after political opponents. And Trump makes no secret of the fact that he's targeting, Kamala Harris and Hillary and
Yeah.
Gavin Newsom and Adam Schiff and I don't know who else.
It's an endless list.
Right. It's an endless list, and most of it doesn't go anywhere. But when the government actually does begin a federal investigation of you, it's incredibly intrusive. It's something you want to dearly avoid, and who knows what they will find. Some transgression that you committed, even if it's nothing that they were looking for. So it's not a joke. And again, while it's happened before, it's never been so openly declared that these people, whoever they are the enemies of the public, the enemies of the people, and these very authoritarian type sounding things. And they need to be arrested, prosecuted, put in prison. Now, fortunately, we do have a jury system in place, and that exists to blunt many of these attacks. I mean, for example, even the grand jury system, which in federal system is easy. In California, the now acting or assistant, whatever that guy is, in charge of Los Angeles, is having trouble getting indictments simply because Los Angelinos are saying, see the way I did that? Los Angelinos in my
Yes, very good.
Spanish accent. People from Los Angeles are reluctant to issue criminal indictments over these things.
But there again, you raise an interesting question, I think, anyway, which is what has changed then? You're talking about how some of these issues have been, in one form or another, ongoing throughout American history, but now they're more in the open. The current president, Donald Trump, has no qualms about being extremely vocal about who his so-called enemies are and going after his enemies. What has allowed that shift to happen? Why is it now considered acceptable, at least I guess in some circles, for this to be so open, that it's okay for the president of the United States to, in effect, have an open enemies list? And yes, I know Richard Nixon did too, but to your point,
he hid it.
that was
He
not,
concealed
he hid
it. Denied
Yes,
it
right.
existed. He didn't go on, he didn't give interviews on camera listing
Right.
all of the people he was going to retaliate.
And that's precisely my point.
Well,
So
what
has changed?
A Trump
Yeah,
supporter
Ron,
would simply say he's being honest.
well,
Right?
maybe he is, and maybe he is being honest.
Yeah, but honesty, as we know, is not a great thing. The people who flew planes into the World Trade Center were honest people in terms they honestly wanted to cause a mass
Yes.
casualty event. But we don't give them
Yes.
points for their veracity.
But why? But my question is, why does a fairly large segment of American society, certainly not all, but a large segment of the American society, consider that acceptable? I think if Richard Nixon, even in his day, had Richard Nixon been open and honest about his enemies list and about his desire for retribution for all the political ills that he perceived were happening in the country and all the things that were aimed at him and his administration. If he were as honest as Trump, I'm not so sure that in those days, and we're not talking about that long ago, that in those days that would have been considered acceptable, that wouldn't have been uniformly or at least very vocally condemned by large segments of the American society. You don't see that happening now. So there has been a change. Why?
Well, certainly the acceptability of what Trump is now doing um, doesn't have quite as many historical parallels because these things were done secretly. But what you do have now is, number one, the sheer quantity of people affected. And it's a tricky thing if you target one person for their speech, okay, that's bad. But if you target 100,000 people for their speech, is that just a continuation of what you've done before, or is it something, fundamentally different? I leave that to your listeners, but people are willing.
But are you? But let me interrupt for a second. So are you? It's because it sounds, Ron, like what you're saying or arguing is that the only thing that's really different is scale. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, yeah, totally. Scale is
Scale.
different, and I mean, scale counts, right?
Yeah.
Killing one person for their religion is a murder, and killing a million for their religion is genocide. There is actually a difference. One is not just a million times worse than the other. It's a whole category of worse.
Right.
Uh, but I think people are willing to accept this because, number one, a lot of Trump supporters want this. They're not the ones being hurt, right? The people they have grown to hate are the ones being hurt by all of this. Immigrants and liberals and leftists and radicals and artists and, you know, Big Bird and all of the other, enemies
Yeah.
of conservative culture wrapped up in, the description as woke. They're happy to see that pain being inflicted on people they consider to be their enemies, on people they consider to be un-American, and people they consider to be responsible for the miserable situation they find themselves in life. And even the people who don't approve, for example, like opinion poll after opinion poll will tell you the majority of Americans don't like the way Trump is carrying out deportations.
Hmm.
But they don't, I mean, they don't like it in the way they don't like static cling. That little touch of electricity when you're pulling your clothes
Yeah.
out of the dryer. Nobody
Uh-huh.
likes that. You disapprove of it, but you're not going to change anything in the way you live your life because of that. So until they are the ones being targeted, or until Trump's policies wreak havoc in their life in other areas, they don't care. They either are totally fine with it, all on board, or largely indifferent. And I think that's true of a majority of the American people. Certainly, it's true of Congress, which has rarely been as captive of an administration as
Yeah.
the current House of Representatives and Senate.
So let's drill down more on, as I think you put it early on, what's actually happening at the ground level, and how all these things that we've just been talking about, how do they actually manifest? How does it manifest itself in terms of real life? And let's take the example of. I think you brought up somebody visiting the United States and perhaps being queried about what's in their social media. Is that a real threat to somebody who's coming here from, France or Germany or the Middle East or wherever, that they arrive at LAX or they arrive at JFK or wherever it is they arrive in the United States? Do they have to be more concerned now than they would have been, say, 5 years ago, and in what ways?
Well, I can tell you what I tell my clients when they contact me because they're concerned, which is number one, uh, delete your social media. Just get rid of it. If you want, you can back it up on a remote disk, but make sure your social media is offline if there is anything that can be construed as critical of the government of the United States or the state of Israel.
I want to be clear on one thing that you said it without saying obviously who your clients are. But are you saying you have people who want to visit the U.S. and
Yeah,
they contact you and they say, Ron, I'm coming to the U.S. I'm not so sure I'm comfortable with some of the things I've said on my Instagram or my Facebook page or Twitter or X. What do I do? Do they actually? Is that a
yeah.
contact
I get
that
those. I get those calls with remarkable and sad frequency.
really?
Uh, yeah,
But
and
what is it? What is it that they're afraid? I'm really curious about that. What is it that they're afraid of?
well, they're afraid, number one, they'll be denied entry into the United States, which
Okay.
kind of messes up your travel plans if you're
Hmm.
on a vacation. Okay, I
Yeah.
recognize it's not a concentration camp. I'm not suggesting that being denied entry into the United States is equivalent to being thrown in jail, but it's a disruption. The other thing that they fear is being thrown in jail. There is tremendous discretion uh, by customs in the United States as to whether, excuse me, to admit you, refuse your admission, or take you into custody and hold you for deportation. And there have been many immigrants, and not just the usual suspects from
Hmm.
the Middle East. There have been many, many immigrants, uh, in terms, not in terms of percentage, obviously, but in terms of quantity from Canada and Germany and England who find themselves in immigration detention one way or the other, waiting for the next flight back to wherever they came from because they don't, personally fly you out. You have to sit there with a whole bunch of people. You fill up the pool with the Canadians and then you bring them over the border. And so I say, delete your social media, uh, delete any contacts that you have with people who may be deemed to be undesirable by the government of the United States. Uh, and when you're asked to open your phone, open your laptop, you don't have to do it, but you will almost certainly be denied admission into the United States. So just make sure when they open your phone and laptop, it all looks really nice. TikTok videos of chickens and stuff like that, interspecies animal friendships, the way that golden retriever just snuggles up with that little duckling. Perfect. Um,
Yeah.
rough colors of the Palestinian flag? No. Watermelon slices? No.
No?
Uh, no, because they are the colors of the Palestinian flag, and they
I
have been
see. Okay.
a meme symbol for the slaughter in Gaza. So yeah, be very, very, very careful.
What about an American, though, traveling overseas, who has interesting things, however one would describe interesting, on their social media, on their phones, and they come back from a trip back into the United States? Do they have more protections than that tourist coming to the U.S. from another country? And what would those protections shield them from?
So let's do a scope of protection, shall we? The
Hmm.
You come into the United States as a tourist. You have no protections coming into the country. They
At
can
all.
revoke you at all. Well, I mean, withdrawn, not at all. They can't hunt you for sport, for
Okay.
example.
Right.
Uh, they,
That's good
they
to
can't
know.
starve you or beat you to death, usually. But in terms of entering into the United States, coming into the United States and walking out the airport and hailing a cab, you have no protections. Absolutely none. As a citizen, you have complete protections. The government cannot stop an American citizen from returning home to the United States of America. Can they detain you for a bit to ask you questions, where you've been, who did you meet, who did you see? They can do that. You don't have to answer those questions. and then you are released. You can't be, as of today, and I'm always very careful when I advise my clients because they want to know in sort of absolutes, like what's going to happen. I can tell you what has happened. I can tell you what's going on right now. I can't tell you what's going to happen tomorrow. But as of today, an American citizen can't be turned away from the United States or even prosecuted for the content of their social media, for the most part, unless the social
Oh,
media is.
all right, but pause for a second. So, all right, so I come back from a trip, and maybe I went to I don't know, the Middle East or some country that is controversial in the minds of some, right? And I go through customs. I have my little phone here. I'm an American citizen. Can they demand, as they apparently can for a tourist, right, coming into the United States? Can customs say to me as a U.S. citizen, uh, open up your phone. We'd like to see what you have on X or what you have on your Instagram. You've been to some countries that are suspect in some way. Um, can they do that legally?
Well, the answer
Well,
is yeah.
I'll withdraw that question. I'll withdraw my own question. Can they do
Do
it?
you
So
have to
get the way.
comply? The answer is no. They can ask, they can even demand. You don't have to comply. You don't, if you're a citizen, you don't have to open your phone. You don't have to answer their questions. You can tell them to, you can recite the First Amendment. You can assert that as a citizen, I refuse to discuss my political beliefs, my associations, my friendships, and my enemies with the government. Thank you very much. And they can say, well, you'll be here for a bit if you don't change your mind. And so you
Ah,
stay there for a
What's a bid? How long is a bid?
few hours.
Right. And they can do that.
Yes, they can.
Why?
And
But how?
I,
I'm educate me on that.
well, it's
If I
just,
have all
it's
these
just,
rights, why can't I simply say to them if they say we'd like to see your phone, and I say, fuck yourself. Why do they have the right to detain me?
well, the practice is, well, I have to go talk to a supervisor, right? Which sounds reasonable enough. I'm just, I'm like a beat cop.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're here, but let me go talk to a boss. The boss is out to lunch or unavailable. So you end up spending a few hours sitting there doing nothing. Trip interrupted. Connecting flight, forget about it. The other people who you traveled with, they don't know whether to sit around and wait for you or abandon you, which feels like, geez, I'm
Yeah.
abandoning dad. I kind of love dad. Come on, honey, dad'll catch up. It's time to, you
Yeah.
know, check out Zeckendorf Towers or something.
I know where that is. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
All right. So there are ways. What you're saying is that there are still ways that they can sort of play with you, even if you are a U.S. system. Is there any evidence, from your point of view as an attorney, that this, in fact, these practices have escalated vis-a-vis American citizens?
Yes. Yes, they have escalated, although I won't say it's a consistent thing for most people. Most people, there's not a problem. This sort of special screening process, which you can often see on your boarding card, the
Mhm.
SSSS boarding designation means you've been set aside for special screening. Is happening more often, but it used to happen a lot too in previous administrations. The most of the attack is on the people who have the fewest rights.
Mhm.
It shouldn't shock anybody.
Are you shocked, talking about being shocked, that so many people in your own profession, lawyers, big law firms I'm talking about now for the most part, have caved in to this current administration in order to continue to do business. And I think there are people who might be confused about what kind of business would a law firm uh, feel threatened by an administration about? How can a sitting president of the United States have an impact on a large law firm? I think some people would be scratching their heads going, how does that go down? How does that go down? And
Right.
are you
And
disappointed in your own profession?
right. And you would expect that. You say, gee, what is the president of the United States doing telling law firms who they can represent and who they can't? Like, since when does the president of the United States tell drug companies they have to lower their prices? There's no authority for that. So what Trump did was a kind of a classic move that we've seen before, but never one practiced so broadly. Trump stripped all of the law firms that he targeted, all the lawyers of their security clearances. He told them that he was going to bar them from the federal courthouses. Which, I mean, okay, can he do that? We don't know, because along with other types of things, like the government will never be your client, and we will retaliate against your other clients if they continue to use your services as a firm. The law firms capitulated, and the capitulation was in two areas. Number one, of course, nice big cash payments. And number two, donations. Again, donations of money, of services for causes the president aspires to champion. It was unclear what those were. But the second part, which is even more pernicious, is to abandon all so-called DEI, diversity, inclusion initiatives. Basically, no more hiring of Black people or brown people or women is going to be viewed in a negative way, is going to be viewed as you favoring minority and women over white men. And they all capitulated. And I was surprised that the first one, which is Paul Weiss, was a firm legendary in the United States for its civil rights practice and its defense of civil liberties. They not only capitulated first, they tried to get other people to join their capitulation. And it's business. That's the nature of the profession. For some of us, it's a vocation, and we will do this and represent the unpopular, as long as we're physically or mentally able. But if you're, senior partners at a giant law firm, you have all these mouths to feed, you say, it's too expensive to fight the government, we give in. And all of the top 10 largest billing law firms in the United States gave in, even though they are the entities who actually have the ability to fight this administration. And the
So
smaller
is
firms
it all right?
fought
So
back
so
and are winning.
right, but there again, and I keep circling back to the word that I used at the very beginning about a fundamental change. Okay, I'll plead ignorance if this sort of thing has happened on the scale it's just happened with large legal firms in the past. But I have to admit, I don't recall anything quite like that, and my guess is you don't either. So
Well, that's
isn't
true.
that
I mean,
right? That is true.
that's fair, but
But
when the large law firm became a thing at the beginning of the 20th century, and they grew and they grew and they grew. Um, they were largely firms that hired only white men. They were intensely conservative in their orientation in terms of preserving the status quo. They rarely represented people who were unpopular with the government. So yeah, I mean, it's fine to say you didn't have this problem in the 1950s. Big law wasn't intimidated. No, they weren't. They didn't have to be intimidated.
Right.
They came pre-packaged as a tool of the government. It's only when they started letting in blacks and women and Jews and other people
Right.
and that it became the idea that the law should be used as a tool of social change and criminal legal reform and all of those things became popular in the 60s and 70s, 80s, and 90s. So you didn't have this problem before, but you didn't need to have this problem because they were in line at birth.
So does the same hold true for universities? Because as you know, major universities, some of them anyway, in this country, are also caving in. Some put up a bit of a fight, but are now in negotiations, if one believes the press, to mollify the current administration. And mollification usually means some financial transaction taking place in exchange for leniency at the hands of the administration. Same thing that this didn't need to happen in the past because universities were just places where a bunch of
No,
white
no,
males. No, that wasn't true.
you didn't. Well, actually, it kind of was true for a long time
Well,
in
for
American
some, well,
history.
but
Um,
but not like law
yeah,
firms. Yeah, but they weren't like law firms.
right.
No.
Not like law firms. Occasionally, somebody black or
Occasionally, yes, that's right.
with breasts uh, could make their way in. Yeah, sometimes. That is different. I mean,
Yeah,
look, conservatives have been railing at liberal universities and elite universities for
a
at
long time.
least years, at
Yeah.
least a century, if not more. It's always been a favorite conservative attack vehicle, a wedge issue. You can go all the way back to the Adlai Stevenson Eisenhower debates, where Eisenhower won big points with, referring to Stevenson as, pointy-headed or egg-headed intellectuals,
Actually, yeah.
the common people. So that hatred, that disdain, and those types of rhetorical attacks are not new. This type of attack, I don't think we've ever seen before, where all of the levers of government are being used to bring universities into compliance with an ideological agenda and using the guise of stopping anti-Semitism to implement that. And certainly October 7th and its aftermath gave the government the perfect opportunity to do what it's wanted to do for decades, which is to rein in universities, stop protest, stop departments from teaching radical ideas. Basically, the whole Middle Eastern department of Columbia is under, some form of receivership, transfer power away from the students and faculty into the administration and bring the administration to heel. We have not seen that before.
So, by the way, so when you say when the administration says that this is all being done with universities because of a history of anti-Semitism and the administration has to come in forcefully to get university, are you actually saying you don't buy that?
Yeah, I don't buy that at all.
You
I
don't,
mean, the
huh?
administration has managed to very skillfully conflate protests against the way Israel is conducting this war with anti-Semitism. So it's gotten to the point now where any criticism of Israel is considered to be anti-Semitic. And the only reason that's beginning to change at this point is people see the horrific atrocities in Gaza and the use of starvation as a weapon of war, and they just can't turn away anymore, even if you believed Israel was perfectly justified in fighting this war. And even if you didn't care much about collateral damage when you bomb something, mass starvation has a bad history as a weapon of war. But look, it has been successful in terms of doing what the administration wanted to do, which is to bring many of these universities to heel. And the thing about giving into extortion as a general matter, it doesn't stop. It's not like, whew, okay, we paid off the Trump administration. We paid $200 million in fines. We, lined the pockets of a bunch of pro-Israel students who claimed that they're, suffered microaggressions and had their mellow harshed by, student protests. Even though when it was black people saying that, we like laughed at them and scorned them. Okay. And we also took over the Middle Eastern Studies departments. We got rid of a lot of faculty members and deans. We're done now. They're never done.
And does that continue even when the day comes, and presumably it will, when Donald Trump leaves the White House? Even if a Democrat comes in, you have that large segment of the American population that is supportive of what this current administration is doing. Does that keep the pressure on even future administrations to
Well,
continue this sort of thing?
we have no idea what's going to happen when Trump is finished. Most of us are just too busy trying to survive in the day-to-day that is the Trump administration.
What do you fear?
I fear what's happening. I try to live more or less in the moment. I fear that immigrants who are here lawfully, who have lawful status, are being grabbed from immigration courts where they show up to check in as they're required to do by masked agents who don't represent, whose authority is not clear. I mean, obviously they're acting under federal auspices, but are they ICE? Are they Homeland Security? Are they the FBI? The Marshal Service? Are they special? Whatever. I have no idea. Grabbed by masked people, held in appalling conditions of detention, and then either put on a plane to South Sudan or some container in Djibouti, awaiting their fate, or stuck in detention facilities for months and months and months until they can get legal representation. That's what I fear. I fear ruinous federal criminal investigations into people's lives. I fear the increasing use of the pardon power to reward hacks and cronies and campaign donors and the like, while using the other side of that, the criminal legal system, to go after people that this administration doesn't like. I fear things like, gee, the Trump administration dropping charges against New York City Mayor Eric Adams. And they were serious charges. I know that in the media they were described as, oh, he accepted some free upgrades. That wasn't the crux of the case. The crux of the case was he was accepting money from foreign donors, the Turkish government, which, by the way, is not known for its love of Israel. He was accepting foreign donations from a hostile foreign power and using those to obtain taxpayer-funded matching funds. It's kind of a serious thing. Though all of those charges were dismissed against him so he could help facilitate Trump's deportation agenda. They said that. So I fear all those things. I fear them every day. And that's what's going on every day.
On that note, Ron Kuby, it was very good discussion. And I enjoyed it immensely. And I thank you for taking part in this podcast. And for those of you watching or listening, I hope you did enjoy it. Any comments you have, feel free to let us know, and we'll try to get back to some of you anyway. If you like this
Feel free
podcast,
to forward them directly to me, and I will
yes.
ignore them. So I'm not even going to give you my contact information. If you
Okay.
care enough, you can find it, okay?
All right. So ignore Ron. Just ignore the man on the other side of the screen. If you like the podcast, though, do by all means subscribe.
Yes.
To the next, until the next episode of SOS America, I'm Charles Feldman. Thanks for watching, and thanks for listening.